Hey everyone, it's Brandy and this is Brandy Reads. Welcome back. Today we're going to discuss the Bone Witch trilogy. I said in an earlier video that I was going to read the Bone Witch trilogy this year for one of my TBRs. So here's the first one. Read it. It's great. The series starts off wonderful. The author is Ren Chapeko, and I think I'm saying that correctly, but I'm not positive. But her world building in this fantasy novel is absolutely wonderful. She does a great job with it. You really feel like you're there and you get a sense of where everything is in relation to everything else in this world. So it's very in-depth and very well thought out and well articulated in the novel itself. So in this novel, you first meet Tia at the age of 17, but she's telling her story to a man who is a bard who's going to sing her story to the worlds after she passes, which she thinks will be happening soon. She tells her story, and in telling her story she goes back to when she was 12 and first found out she was a witch and what her power was. And her power is necromancy. She can raise the dead, and not just human but other things as well, which causes her to be very feared. There are very few Asha, which are what the witches are called, in this world that can raise the dead, and they're called dark Asha, but then slang term is called a bone witch. So the bone witches are very feared because their power is dark, and not all the witches have that power. And so people live in fear of that because there's things that the bone witches can do that no one else with power can do. So upon Tia's discovery that she is a bone witch, she is found by another bone witch who feels the dark magic that she's using and comes and finds her and takes her under her wing and takes her back to the place where all of the Asha train and reside, whether they're dark or light Asha. They all train in the same city, in the same place called the Willows. So Lady Michaela comes and takes Tia to the Willows, and they start her training. So her story, even though you meet her at 17, her story picks up where she first finds out she's a dark Asha at the age of 12, and it goes from there. And those things unfold. Like I said, she's telling a bard who is to sing her story once she has passed. So you get her story of what she's telling the bard, but then you get what's going on in the present. I can't think of any other novels that I could compare this to that would give you a sense of the world or the struggles or anything else that's going on within this world. It's very different in and of itself. It's its own thing. There may be others out there that are like it. I've just not read them, but for me, this was unlike anything that I've read before. There are many struggles that Tia has to face in her training. Stuff that she can do that others can't do, and things that others can do that she can't do. So it's this learning process, but it's also compensation for what she can do that others can't do, and again what others can do that she can't do. So it's learning to compensate in her training, because there's not very many dark Asha. They're considered, again, bad, and so there's not many in the realm where they're at. And each one, like each generation, there's only a handful dark Asha, and the dark Asha actually perform more civil services, I guess is what they would be considered. They do more for the public and for the kingdoms themselves. There's 8 kingdoms in this world, and the dark Asha perform several services to these kingdoms that no one else can do. The normal Asha that cannot do the dark magic cannot perform these services, but they're still feared and still looked down upon, even though they do more good for the kingdoms than the regular Asha are considered to do. So with wanting to discuss the whole series and not give too much away from book to book. So the first book is about Tia's discovery of her powers, and then the training and initial struggles that she has to go through in learning how to control and use her powers, and to use her powers for the better of the kingdoms. Book 2 of this series is The Heart Forger, and it's a seamless, just smooth transition right from book 1 into book 2. You pick right up where book 1 left off. It's very interesting. It keeps you wanting to read because you know where she's at and you want to know how she got there. All of the steps that it took for her to get where she's at and what transpired, what circumstances led to where she's currently at. And it's definitely this keep going and keep seeing what's going on, what's going to happen. Book 3 is called Shadow Glass, and again it is a continuation of this story, and it picks right up very seamlessly where the other left off, and it's this smooth transition into the new book. They don't really leave you on cliffhangers at the ends of the books. It's just, you know, this story isn't completed, you know her story has to be finished, and this ending that you are just waiting on the edge of your seat for, because you know there's something big going to come at the end of this story, and each book reveals a little bit more and a little bit more of that, and there are so many twists within this storyline, things that I didn't even see coming, and I'm usually pretty good at seeing what's coming next. I'm usually really good at figuring out what's about to happen and who's involved with it, and I could not keep up and could not picture that ahead of time. I was shocked several times with revelations within the stories, just because, I mean, there are so many twists that you just don't see coming, which I think the guessing aspect is another big thing. Sometimes when you can figure out the plot line ahead of time, it makes it not as much fun to read. There's been several books that I've figured out the plot line and still want to know how they get there, and of course finish reading, and it doesn't really detract any from the experience of reading it. It just takes the surprise element out of it. There were some things with this story that I could have done without. Not that they were necessarily bad, but they were not necessary to the story. There are some political undertones that are kind of thrown in there, and they almost feel a little bit forced, but at the same time, again, they're not necessary. They don't change the main story. They're just side notes that could have been left alone, and it wouldn't have affected it anything. It wouldn't have changed any of the story. I'm not sure why they were thrown in there. I read it, and I don't particularly care for the political undertones, and don't feel that they need to be shoved down our throats just because somebody wants to put them in there. But again, the story itself, the main story, is a great story and one worth following if you can overlook those things. I don't agree with this being labeled teen fiction. It is geared for ages, one thing I've seen says ages 12 to 17, one thing I've seen says ages 14 to 17. I don't agree with that. I think 17 would be the youngest I would suggest anyone be to read this novel, just because there are, again, the political undertones, but there's also some, especially in the last book, some scenes that I don't feel is very appropriate for younger readers. I certainly would want my 15-year-old reading this, and I would suggest it to anyone that comes to my store to purchase a novel for anyone under the age of 17. Adults, absolutely, it's a great, I would say it's a great young adult fiction. That's just my opinion on it, so just to give you a heads up on that. So if you're one of those that like to censor what your children read, this is one that I would definitely say censor. Like I said, the main storyline is fantastic, and I really enjoyed following it. And you know, it's not, for me, it wasn't that difficult to just push aside those things that, you know, were not to my particular liking, I guess, that I could have done without. And again, they didn't change the story or anything. So if you're just looking for something, a good fantasy read, this definitely falls in that category. So if this is your first time watching, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe. Let us know how you feel about it. If you've read this series, the third book doesn't come out in this series until March. So if you read the first two, let us know what you thought of them. Again, I'm not trying to give any spoilers away in this one because it is the whole series, so I don't want to ruin anything for anyone if someone's interested in reading it and haven't read the first two yet. So the third one comes out March 5th. Yes, March 5th of this year. So a little more than a month away. It'll come out. Click here to subscribe and click here to check out my 2019 TBR where I introduced the Bone Witch series.